India's most affordable electric vehicle is a heavy cross to bear, and it's one that's been given to the updated Tigor EV that now operates on Tata's high voltage Ziptron EV architecture borrowed from the Nexon EV. But the powertrain in this has been detuned, and considering the price that it comes in at, is the Tigor EV with the Ziptron EV architecture really India's most affordable EV that should interest you? You may remember the Tigor EV from earlier. It was available for commercial customers only and was based on a lower voltage electric architecture with lower power and lower range. That car has now been named the Express T EV. As for the new Tigor EV, a new grille, air dam, projector headlamps and smartly designed steel wheels spruce up the design versus the previous iteration. Like the Nexon EV, it's virtually identical to its fossil fuel powered sibling, the Tigor facelift that launched last year. It's available in two colors, and if you like the Tigor, you'll like the EV by extension, though personally, I'm not a big fan of the truncated boot. It's a similar story in the cabin, with the gear lever's place being taken by the rotary drive mode selector, which can be a little fiddly to use. The facelifted Tigor's digital instrumentation now displays state of charge, rates your driving, and the level of regen braking. It's a comfortable place to be, if a little Spartan for the asking price, and the door pockets are a little on the slim side. The Tigor EV is available in three variants, XE, XM and XZ Plus, with the base XE's standout worthy features only being climate control and reversing sensors. The mid-spec XM actually seems like the best bet for the value hunter, while our car is the top XZ Plus dual-tone variant with the full features list. That being said, safety comes standard across the range, with the Tigor EV being the first EV to be crash tested by the global NCAP with a 4-star safety rating, same as the petrol Tigor. 2 airbags ABS with EBD are standard, though no ISOFIX anchor points are available. The battery is safe too, with IP67 waterproof rating and industry certification against nail penetration at a cell level. Unlike many other electric vehicles out there, the batteries for the Tigor EV, as they are in the Nexon EV, are set under the rear seat. So that means the floor itself isn't sat higher up, which means you don't have that typical EV slightly knees up in your face feeling. The legroom is the same as in the petrol variant, and the headroom, though it's a little short, pretty much remains the same. What you do get in the Nexon EV is just the feeling of a little more width, a little more space, and of course adjustable head restraints and rear AC vents. Where the Tigor EV loses out to the petrol Tigor is in boot space, thanks to the higher boot floor forcing the spare wheel into the luggage compartment. The largest compact sedan boot at 419 litres in the petrol is down to 316 litres with the electric. Again, comparisons to the Nexon EV are inevitable, with the SUV boasting of a more usable 350-litre boot. While the high-voltage Ziptron EV architecture is borrowed from the Nexon EV, the electric motor is all new, smaller and lighter than the motor in that crossover, and outputs 75 PS and 170 Nm of torque. The 26 kWh battery is smaller in capacity too, but gives the Tigor EV an ARAI certified driving range of 306 km on a single charge. Similarly, a 0 to 80% charge is possible in 65 minutes via a 25 kW DC fast charger, with the supplied AC charger needing 8 hours 45 minutes for the same. Right, so your initial impressions of the Tigor EV are going to be of an obviously very silent performer. Now, the spec sheet might leave you a little disappointed, but in its regular drive mode, it's absolutely adequate for city driving. For most people in regular city driving, regular drive mode is what they'd want. There is definitely enough power and torque on call for quick city overtakes. They're not blindingly quick in the way that electric vehicles can be, but the torque is well metered out and it won't take relatively novice drivers by surprise. Now, it is possible to get a little more out of the drivetrain when you put it in its S mode, and that's when you feel the throttle responses get a lot sharper and there's a lot more happening when you depress your right foot. Now, considering the Tigor EV will definitely be the first electric vehicle for most of the people who are looking at buying it, and probably the first car for some of the people considering buying it. It serves as a very good initiation into the world of electric cars. I mean, just look at how silent it is. It's silent enough that the ticking of the indicator gets amplified, and even the raindrops falling on the windscreen, you definitely hear it a lot more because there's just no noise or vibes to speak of. With the Tigor EV now inheriting the Nexon EV's Ziptron electric vehicle architecture, that means it's also inherited its largest drawback, which is the fact that it lacks traction control or an electronic stability program. Of course, in the Tigor EV, with its cut, power and torque figures, that's not as big an issue. Where that does come into play is on a wet day like today. If you're pulling away from low speed turns, like this U-turn for example, if you are not careful with your throttle application, there will be wheel spin and there will be understeer and the car will want to push on through. Now, it's obviously a matter of getting used to it, but for a new driver, that peril of driving an electric car still does remain, but that's only when it's set in the S mode. The learning curve for driving the Tigor EV is nice and gradual. Even the regenerative braking, which sometimes catches people off guard, is very progressive in this car. Tata has tweaked the regen braking parameters versus the Nexon EV, where the braking could feel a lot more abrupt. This results in smoother coasting behavior when off the throttle. So when you're cruising in the Tigor EV at about 60 and you take your foot off the throttle, it very gradually ramps up the regen braking, and it's definitely not for one pedal driving because the car won't slow down enough, and it definitely won't slow down to walking speeds by itself. Tata's range of small cars have always been known for their pretty exceptional ride quality, and the Tigor EV is no different. In fact, it may just ride a little better than its petrol counterpart just by virtue of the weight being carried low. The suspension and steering has also been retuned for the Tigor EV to offer an experience that's more in tune with the seamless torque delivery from the electric powertrain. Not that many owners are going to be hustling their Tigor EV, but the handling feels fairly neutral with the weight carried down low like we said, and the steering does feel precise enough even though it's not particularly agile. The Tigor EV isn't meant to be that car, so it gives you a nice sense of calm confidence instead. Our performance test actually threw up a lot of interesting numbers. In drive mode, the Tigor EV is slower than the Nexon EV, which is to be expected despite the lower weight of the Tigor EV. But it's really just how much slower that's the surprise. In its S mode, the Tigor EV comes close enough to the larger and more expensive Nexon EV for most people to not really care about the difference and say that is nearly enough. But considering just how much range the S mode eats into, I think, however, leave the Tigor EV in its drive mode, which most people are likely to do to get the best range out of it, and the car doesn't really perform the way you would expect a rupees 12 lakh or more electric vehicle to do. So where that issue is exacerbated is on the highway, where in its D mode, the Tigor EV doesn't really feel like it's got the guts for highway overtakes, though it will give you fairly relaxed overtakes if what you're trying to overtake isn't traveling too quickly. Of course, putting it into S does remedy this quite a bit, but as we've seen, putting it into S also chews through your battery, so you'll have to choose quite wisely. That ARAI certified range is in lab conditions, and as we've seen with the Nexon EV's real-world range, which hovers between 200 to 240 in regular driving, expect about the same from the smaller, lower, therefore slightly better aerodynamically efficient Tigor EV. With figures extrapolated from our efficiency testing, you could probably expect around 225 kilometers or more if you're driving in the city and about 200 kilometers of highway driving, but of course this depends on your driving style. On its own, the Tigor EV is a likable, comfortable, zero-emissions car best suited for city use. Priced between Rs 11.99 to 12.99 lakh ex-showroom before any subsidies, the asking price may seem a little high for what is essentially a cost-competitive compact sedan with an electric powertrain. As an initiation into EVs, it would make sense for a lot of people, though we can't help but think even a base Nexon EV is still the more compelling buy thanks to the extra space, features and power that come standard.